Alright guys, Bill, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with my now typical player ranking for the latest season of Big Brother 25, where I'll be wrapping up my coverage of the season by ranking every player on the season based on how I feel like they played on the season. So obviously we have 17 players to rank here, and let's start all off at number 17. I mean, I don't even really want to talk about this person, but we got Luke. Luke sucks. Even before he was ejected, he was a pretty big target for the following week. He was a pretty big target for the week that he was even there. Where had it not been for the initial twist with nominations, he probably would have been on the block against Kirsten. He probably would have gone home by the end of the week. So again, sucks as a person, sucks as a player. Only minor good thing he did across the season was create the Phalanx 5, but even that crumbled right away. Again, there's almost nothing good to say about Luke. Let's just move on. At number 16, the next lowest player from this season does end up being the actual official first boot, that being Kirsten. And again, for being a first boot, I don't think Kirsten is that bad. Now, Kirsten's obviously someone that made a big mistake by the time of day 2, where she really played her first 2 days really aggressively, to the point where obviously she became a big target because of that. And after that, she was kind of just left out of conversations, kind of just there in the game without any true chance of saving herself. And she obviously ends up getting evicted in a unanimous vote by the end of it. Despite that, I do feel like there are just aspects of her game that kind of feel like she was a little bit screwed over. Really in the fact that, again, she was nominated right away, right from the very beginning of the game. After she loses the competition at the beginning, she knows that she is one of the only 4 people that could possibly be nominated. And through that, obviously, yeah, you're forced to play more aggressively because you need to find safety in the game. And while again she does play very sloppily, I do feel like part of it is just the effects of her having to be put up from the very beginning. Or I think had that not been the case, I do feel like she could have fallen into the Jag, Riley, Blue side of the house that, and she was already seeming to side with even after all this happened. Even beyond that, again, like I feel like even with the nominations, had it not been just limited to those 4 people, he also probably would have been safe anyway. Where again, I think Luke would have been in target had he been eligible to go up. And really, I do feel like Kirsten just kind of gets screwed over in that aspect. Now again, does she play well? No. Again, she plays poorly surrounding that. Though, again, I think for a first boot, I wouldn't consider her like one of the worst because of those aspects of her getting screwed over. But again, still doesn't play well, and because that she's still here at number 16. Now number 15, we're moving on to a player that I just thought was kind of useless in the game. I don't think this person really did much good, really at all. So despite him making it further than 2 people that we haven't talked about yet, at 15, I'm still going to go Red. And again, I just think Red is a pretty terrible player. Now, I think there are, again, minor things to prop up Red, which really just goes with a lot of the early boots on this season, where, again, like Red, yes, he had Cameron as a very solid ally. Yes, he still had this good relationship with Bowie Jane. He found himself in the Professor's Alliance that ran the first week and a half or so. The problem is that I feel like he did very little active work to get a lot of what he got in the game. Again, the fact that he had like Bowie Jane's loyalty was mostly from the fact that, again, he was in the Professors. Now, why was he in the Professors? Simply because he was left out of the initial majority alliance that Jag, Riley, and Blue formed. And through that, he was just kind of picked up as an outsider. Even early on in the game, he didn't really have any allies. He didn't really have that many close relationships and kind of just looked at as a floater in the game. And even beyond that, again, he wasn't involved in the eventual heist and backdoor. He was the last to know about that. Even everyone outside of his actual alliance knew about it before he did. Also, week 3, he actually comes extremely close to getting backdoored himself, where, again, Ciries, Izzy, and Felicia just never trusted him, and were even considering backdooring him when they heard about the middlemen, which wasn't even a real thing, but they just assumed that Red was part of it and was the leader of it and wanted to target him there. Then we get to the Jag eviction round, where despite having all the signs that he's on the bottom alongside Cameron, he still ends up getting Cameron to not make the move against Izzy, Ciries, and Felicia, and proceeds to get himself targeted the very following week. Now, I will say again, even in his boot week, there are some things to give him credit for. The fact that, again, Cameron would have gone home over him, obviously. Also, Jag was initially going to go home over him until the last second, where Red mentioned that he wanted to repair his relationship with Cameron, which, again, is, yeah, him blowing up his own game, but I don't really actually fault him that much for saying that. As, again, how would he know that saying this would cause Jared to freak out because Jared had been lying to him the entire time, and this means that Jared's lies would be exposed, which means that Red needs to get taken out. I don't really fault him that much for that moment in particular, though, and the fact that he doesn't pick up on the fact that the vote flipped, and even then, like, he sees Felicia running around thinking that it's because she's flipping the vote on him, when in reality, she's trying to flip the vote back off of him. And again, like, just for me, Red, I just think is a terrible player. I just feel like almost nothing good about his game came to him actively from things that he actually did. And again, there were just so many signs across the season that he was on the bottom. He just never picked up on any of them and actively made moves to even progress his spot on the bottom. So again, Red just sucks. I put him here at number 15. Now number 14, we're moving on to a person that I think has more positives than Red, also probably has bigger negatives than Red. But either way, I went at 14 with Heum. And again, Heum is a player that had a like Devin-like trajectory early on, where it seemed like he was the leader of this Professor's Alliance. He was seemingly in a good spot coming out of week 1, but also was a primary target for the opposite side. Though obviously he wins HOH, and despite him winning HOH in a position where, again, you would think that would cause him to further solidify the Professor's side, a lot of that having to do with his poor social work, where he would just be too domineering in conversations and would be unwilling to really just hear out any other Alliance member, kind of just being pretty set in his ways. And again, all that is really bad. Like, if we're just taking the first 2 weeks into consideration, is he worse than Red? Yeah. But I do think his final week, despite him being aloof for half of it and not knowing that he's the target, once he knows that he's the target, I think he actually plays it pretty well. I think his campaigning up until his eviction is actually pretty strong. He does a pretty good campaign with both sides, where both sides actually consider saving him. Where had it not been for like Cory, more than likely the flip does go through, as Ciries, Felicia, and Izzy were so gung-ho on actually doing it. So again, the fact that he gets backdoored in a position that he should have been completely dead to rights, in a position where, again, like the entire house outside of Red, and I guess maybe Bowie, were like involved in this backdoor plan, and for him to seeming to actually get his way out of it for a second, again, I think is pretty impressive. Like, I think there are major pros and cons to his game. I think it is a very wonky game to assess. Obviously, like, at the end of the day, mostly bad, but I do feel like the minor aspects of good there are better than anything Red had in his game. I think he was a much more active player than Red as well. Where, well, again, I do think it is kind of close between Red and Heum. I do feel like I overall look at Heum's pros in his game a lot more positively than I do with Red, and because that, for me, he is here at number 14. Now number 13, we're moving on to a player that I don't even think this person's actually that great of a player in the grand scheme of things. But I do think in terms of this season, I do think they got pretty unlucky, and that person is Riley. And Riley is an interesting player, obviously, in the sense that she had this massive cult around her, essentially. She is this person that just seemed to be pretty good socially, particularly with the people around her, to where she had the likes of Blue, Jag, Matt, like extremely loyal to her, and even then had someone like a Cameron really falling over for her. She also had these like decent bonds with Jared and Cory. She had a really strong bond with Ciries. Like, it really feels like Riley had a very solid social game, and obviously okay at competitions, but really strategically, it seems like obviously there's a lot missing there, where it felt like she really just went with whatever the last person that talked to her wanted her to go with, and again, it was just kind of sloppy and leaking information, and overall not a good player in the grand scheme of things. But I think in terms of her game on this season, I do think she got very unfortunate. First, in the fact that, again, Jared was in the game, to where he ended up leaking all of her information to Ciries, which allowed for Ciries to form the Professors a lot easier, which again might have happened anyway, but it definitely put Riley in a much more compromised position than what was initially intended. Where again, at the end of the day, like, I also think Cameron probably would have flipped on them anyway, but it probably would have taken him longer to do so had this alliance's demise not been accelerated here. But even beyond that, I do feel like Riley also got pretty unfortunate in how the second week went, where I think Heum winning that HOH and being so resolute in getting out Riley was also pretty unfortunate for her, to where really for the majority of the house, they wanted Cameron out over Riley. But I think it is the fact that Heum, again, was the HOH at that point, and also was just so gung-ho about going for Riley, that made her the target there. And also even beyond that, again, she does come pretty close to staying as well. Now, again, how much do you chalk this up to just Ciries and Izzy not being able to make up their minds? But again, they do actually flip the votes at a point, though obviously later relents through the apprehension from Jared and and Cory, and also realizing that Cameron's going to go for Heum anyway. But again, like Riley, again, like for me, I don't think is that great of a player, but I think considering her run on this season, again, she had a really solid group of allies, more solid than that of Heum by the end of it. She, like Heum, comes very close to staying, and I think unlike Heum, also comes very unfortunate in her becoming the target to begin with. Unlike Heum, who was the number one target for almost the entire house coming to his eviction week. So again, I do think in the debate between Riley and Heum, I do lean towards Riley, even though Riley was taken out by Heum. So I feel like Heum did a lot more wrong. To where while I feel like his campaign at the end was probably more impressive than that of Riley's, I feel like Riley's ability to keep allies on her side is more impressive than Heum. So again, I think it is also relatively close between the two, but I do lean towards Riley at the end of it. So she's here at number 13. Now number 12, we're moving forward quite a bit on the season, taking a big jump placement wise, where we have our first juror on the board here at number 12. I do have Cameron, and Cameron's game is pretty terrible on this season. Again, like he is one where he's essentially the modernized version of Frank. He is someone that really never survives a single round of the game without some level of safety around him. Where week 1 is really the only week where he wasn't in any real danger, though even then he did have safety from the initial comp to where he couldn't be an initial nominee, and with Heum also winning the veto, again, there never was an opportunity for to go up, even though again, I don't think he would have gone up anyway. But still beyond that, again, he was on the block week 2. Very narrowly goes home that week, where again, there was a plan fully set to save Riley that week, and even beyond that, he was the target for the majority of the house coming into that week, largely due to the fact that he rats out his own alliance by the end of week 1, which ends up gaining him no real favors from the people actually in charge of the game at that point. Obviously, week 3, he is also on the block against Heum, and through that also almost goes home against Heum, where Heum almost flips the vote on him. He then wins HOH week 4, where he makes a terrible move and taking out Jag, really just keeping the power structure intact, and through that keeping himself on the bottom, to where again, he would have gone home week 5 had he not won the veto, to where then he wins week 6 HOH, to which he then proceeds to make a terrible move in putting up Izzy and Felicia in a spot where the majority of the house was just against Felicia, and it would have again continued the status quo of him being on the bottom. And again, he gets very fortunate in the fact that Jared blows up his game, and he's able to utilize that in a way that caused all the chaos that eventually leads up to the Izzy flip. But again, it fully was a terrible move to put up Izzy and Felicia to begin with. He then proceeds to be taken out the following week through a back door in a position where it probably would have been beneficial for him to do so. He then comes back through Zombie Week and proceeds to win HOH and veto for no reason when he didn't need to, only to then even fail to get out both of his initial targets in Felicia and Cory and take out Mimi instead, only for him to be perceived to be backdoored the following week by the person he assumed was his closest ally. It's a terrible game, though I think there are a couple, again, glimmers of okay gameplay from Cameron. Now, at the end of the day, I think Cameron is a terrible social player, and I think those are a majority of his issues, and he's also just extremely overconfident to where he just doesn't listen to anyone else, just assumes that he knows better than everyone. But again, I think there are points where he demonstrates some decent game ability. Again, he does end up unintentionally saving himself week 2 by campaigning to Ciries and telling her that he's going after Heum. In his first HOH week, he was aware of the fact that he was on the bottom of the pecking order and was going to make a move and started to set up the pieces for that move. Obviously, Red talks him down for making the move itself. Again, I do think he does very good work in pulling over Jag during the Izzy boot week, where I think he is a main reason why Jag ends up flipping that week. I mean, during Zombie week, I think he plays pretty well. Again, he is able to re-solidify his bond with Matt and Jag, and while it was always a thing to kind of just use Cameron for next following rounds, it does end up giving him a decent amount of safety into the following week, even though he ends up squandering that. But again, I think there are good things with Cameron's game here and there, and he does obviously have a lot of longevity in the season. He does make it to final 9, but his game really, for the most part, is pretty bad, with him literally not surviving a single round without some level of safety, or just outright being on the block, which again is just inherently bad. So I don't think Cameron's game is that good, but I do think there are minor positive aspects that do leave him here at number 12. Now, number 11, we're moving on to a player that I think is also really bad. I think considering this person's position coming into the game, they should have been locked in for a really strong game, but then they just played the game so terribly. And at number 11, we do have Jared. And again, Jared literally came in with his mom, to which they were able to keep it a secret, which again should have inherently greatly boosted Jared's chances of winning this season. And again, yes, he was in a dominant alliance for first like half of the season. He did have a decent amount of control earlier on, but he also blows all that up himself to where, and I fully put the blame onto Jared for the Izzy flip. I do think it is almost entirely what Jared did that caused that to happen. I mean, while Izzy's telling of Cory that he needs to break up with America was like the final straw, it's like everything Jared did up to that point is really what caused all that to be the final straw. Like, Jared is just such a messy, sloppy player that I think it makes it a bit tough to assess him, because again, he did have a decent amount of control earlier on in the game. He was in a very strong position. He was playing the middle week 1 and was still able to play multiple factions for a few more weeks. He again is a very proactive liar, and I do think it's a strat that, again, isn't utilized that often in these social strategy games. I think was actually interesting to see pulled off here, even though, again, it blew up in his face pretty quickly. And it led to him having to cover his tracks constantly, which he had mixed success in that. But again, it really just all comes to head during that Izzy week. But we also have obviously the sloppiness with his relationship with Blue and how he tells her his secret, which was just really dumb. His ostracizing of Cory in America was also really dumb. And we obviously just have his final week where, again, it seemed like he was doing decent work at first and getting Cameron to believe that he was left out in the vote, but then proceeds to leak all this information about Cory that gets back to Cory, that makes Cory aware of the fact that he's now on the bottom. And obviously the game just blows up around him, where the following week he's HOH and ends up taking out Cameron, someone that seemed to be willing to work with him moving forward, only to proceed to be taken out the following week. And he had an entire week to build back his relationships and completely faltered at all of that. Like, just straight up, I don't think Jared is a good player. I think he was one that was put in a good position, especially beyond week 1, simply due to the fact that he had his mom in the house. I think if it wasn't for that, he possibly could have been booted even earlier than that. And considering he had such a massive lead in the game from just all squandered at so quickly and become this house pariah in his last couple weeks, I think it's just, again, just indicative of his terrible play. Now, again, he did still have a decent level of control during the first 5 or so weeks of the game, even though even with that came some really sloppy play, but there was at least that, to where I do feel like because of that, I'm putting him above the people we've talked about so far, but just all around a really abysmal game, one that just is filled with so many unforced errors, in a position where he should have been locked in for the end game. So because of all those issues for me, I do have him at number 11. Now, number 10, we're moving on to a player that I just found to be super frustrating on this season. Particularly in the fact that I don't even think this person's that bad of a player. I just think they played the game poorly. And at number 10, I do have Mimi. And again, like, Mimi is just a very strange case. It's a player that plays this very passive game where she just sticks to her alliance and doesn't really maneuver around that, but she does so actively, not because of her holding to any like morals or her just not having the initiative in the game. It's more so because she actively thought that was the good strategy to use. She just actively thought the best strategy was to lay low. And again, it just feels like a completely misguided strategy, but I do think it also leads to me thinking that she might actually be an okay player if she were to play again. And to be fair, that doesn't really affect this list. I do think that makes Mimi just a tough player to assess. Again, the game that she played on this season was just pretty bad. I mean, she was initially in a good spot. I mean, she was aligned with the Brown Sugar Babes, and she was in the Professors, and it felt like, yeah, she was in a good spot being aligned with the Ciries, Izzy, Felicia side of things. But then eventually, by the time of week 3, like, she's on the bottom of that group simply because she isn't talking to her alliance as much as she should be. And they started to distrust her and thinking that she was part of the middlemen. And there was even a point where they talked about backdooring Mimi that week. And she's like also this player that would get frustrated at her allies for constantly flipping the vote, but would do nothing about it. Instead of actually complaining to them and trying to get them to flip back, she would just go to the storage room and rant about them behind their backs. And again, like, to me, that does show, again, a level of awareness of the game, of her recognizing what is and what isn't a good move for her, but for her to do nothing about it, I think is a major issue there. And really all comes to head with the Izzy week, where yes, she is part of this flip against Izzy, but she was always going to be part of the flip against Izzy. She never planned on not voting out Izzy. And despite her being put in this like brilliant position following that, where she could have easily just played the middle, she instead just decides to go back to her old alliance and not even bother trying to keep her allegiances to the likes of Cory in America and Matt and Jag, these that are just being really expendable moving forward. And we obviously see her being taken out over Felicia, Where again, a lot of that is just due to her passive play and her not securing a relationship with Cory in America. Where initially the plan wasn't going to go through because Matt and Jag thought there was no way that Cory in America would flip on Mimi, only for them to then flip on Mimi because of how obvious she made it that she wasn't trusting of them. And again, it's just a frustrating game. But again, the minor positives here are that, again, she does technically outlast every person that we previously talked about. Obviously, excluding Cameron, but Cameron's obviously a special case, and she did actually vote out Cameron to begin with. And even then, she was actually, like, decently positioned for a lot of the game. It's very rarely talked about as a target until pretty much around the time that she went home, and even then, she wasn't the target initially. Mixing now the fact that, again, I think there were some decent reads from her at points. Again, she does end up trying to keep Jared and Ciries around. She knew that taking out Heum and saving Riley were bad moves for her, but just the game around that is still pretty bad. Simply just due to how passive it is, and because that for me, she's here number 10. Now number 9, we're moving on to a player that I also find to be very frustrating, though in the opposite way, where not because this person is too passive, but because when this person wasn't passive, they were just playing a terrible game, and that person is Blue. And again, Blue is just a frustrating player. I mean, one that was an active player. Again, she would constantly try to campaign for her agenda. The problem is that her agenda was almost never right for her. Where she obviously spends the back half of her game really just focused on going for Cory in America, seemingly just for revenge for Jared, in a position where really all it does is just put the target further on her back, where Cory in America didn't even want to come for her until the point where she started targeting them. And even America had been trying to work with Blue constantly, only for Blue to constantly rat her out left and right. Also, you have her being too trusting of Matt and Jag, to where despite her talking about how she would have went after Matt and Jag, she would still trust them when they were in power, when they were constantly targeting her towards the back portions of her game. Even early on in the game, I do feel like she was a very sloppy player, to where she would just leak information, with her being one of the major reasons why I do think the family style alliance would have never worked, with her just being so kind of open in the fact that the likes of Cory, Jared, and America were outside of the true core of that alliance. So even early on, she wasn't positioned that well. She obviously loses Riley very early on and almost goes home in week 4, where had it not been for her relationship with Jared, she does probably get voted out there. Now, obviously, don't know if Matt would have saved her or not, but still, like, she definitely was in danger during that week. Now, I will say that the big positive for Blue, and the thing that I will give her credit for, is the fact that she is at least an active player. Again, she at least is trying to do things and is actually effective at points. Again, she does convince Matt and Jag that they need to go for America and Cory. Mind you, she does it at the wrong times, to where it doesn't really matter, but she is able to add this like skepticism to Matt and Jag. So it does fracture that alliance quite a bit. She also tried to sabotage Ciries to try to keep Jared in the game, which wasn't super effective, but again, like, at least she tries. At least she is playing the game aggressively. Now again, are her reads at points terrible? Yes. Is she a good player? No. But I still feel like, again, like, in comparison to the people we've talked about so far, I think she's on the same level as the likes of Mimi and Jared. And I think the fact that, again, at least she is playing aggressively and also made it all the way to Final 7 is enough for me to put Blue here at number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to the earliest boot left on the board. A player I found very difficult to assess, but at number 8, I do have Izzy. And Izzy is a player that I think my assessment of her game on this season is probably going to end up being higher than my assessment of her as a player, even though I do think there was a lot of untapped potential on this season. I think Izzy is a player that is, again, a very aggressive player. She is one that is in your face. She is playing this very aggressive strategic game alongside Ciries, and is one to actually go out and enact a lot of their strategies. The question is, how many of those strategies are good strategies? But I mean, like, at the end of the day, it's like she is running the game for like half the game alongside Ciries. She's obviously able to build this really unbreakable bond between her, Ciries, and Jared that, again, obviously was due to the fact that she knew their secret. But again, like, I think she plays off that very well. I think the big issue for Izzy in terms of this individual game is her undying loyalty to Ciries. The fact that she was essentially willing to give up her own game to propel Ciries in the game, I think, is a major issue. It very much feels like Izzy didn't really care about her own game, but sabotage her own game constantly in order to propel Ciries. Now, one of those was even misguided in taking out Heum, where I just think outright that's a terrible move. I mean, for Izzy in particular, Heum was completely loyal to Izzy. That was his number one ally in the game, and for her to cut him there was just really dumb. But then also you have her ratting out Cory constantly to warn Ciries about him, when, again, Cory was 100% loyal to Izzy and actually wanted to go to Final 2 with her early on. So again, like, I just think Izzy's game on that front is pretty bad. I also think we have to factor in the fact that Izzy is still Izzy. I think there are some just personality issues with Izzy where she just simply doesn't get along with a good chunk of people. It's like she's someone that can't hide when she hates somebody, and I think her very openly disliking Cameron and Red obviously makes her a target for them. Also, she just like openly tells Riley that she's coming after her. That was misguided. Obviously couldn't hide her hatred of Bowie Jane. It's like Izzy is not the greatest social player in the world. While there are moments of her being okay, it does feel like she's simply just not able to really mask herself very well. But again, I do think there are some good aspects to her game, particularly in how she was running the show alongside Ciries. And like, truth be told, initially I came into this list thinking she would only be a spot higher than Jared. However, the reason I end up bumping her a little bit more is because, again, I do feel like she does less wrong to cause her elimination. I do feel like her elimination was a lot on Jared's hands, while mixing that in with, again, her undying loyalty to Ciries, which I think made it clear to Cory that she wasn't going to be willing to work with him further down the road, while also, again, just telling him that he needs to break up with America, which is pretty bad. But again, I feel like all that wouldn't have mattered, especially for this one round, had it not been for Jared blowing up their spot, along with the fact that Cameron went HOH, which was a very unlucky situation also, where otherwise Cameron would just been the consensus target. So again, I feel like Izzy doesn't do as much wrong as a lot of the other players that we've talked about so far. So we're mixing down the fact that she really ran the first half of the game alongside Ciries. For me, I did end up feeling that was enough to have Izzy here at number 8. Now, number 7, we're moving on to a player that I am pretty conflicted on my thoughts on this player, as I do feel like this is a player that had some bright moments here and there, but overall also was still a very messy player. But at 7, I do have America. And again, America plays this game to where she's really on the bottom for pretty much her entire run. I don't think there's really a true point in the game where she's really running things, or even in the like true dominant alliance, where obviously initially she's on the bottom of family style, and even then they're on the back burner. She does do pretty good work in building relationships with Cory and Cameron, not mixing that into the fact that the likes of Riley and Heum and Jag and Red were bigger targets than her. It does keep her safe throughout a lot of the early game. Now, obviously, the Izzy vote is where her game kind of shines. The also is also part of what makes her kind of a bad player also, where, again, she's just very sloppy in her leaking of information. Where, again, it's funny as, again, I do give her the most credit for the Izzy vote. I do think she is the one that set a lot of it in action, though also was largely unpurposeful. Again, she was leaking this information to Cameron that caused Cameron to reveal to Felicia that she's going home. But again, she didn't want him to do that. So it's like, while I will give her credit for getting Cameron to finally realize he's on the bottom, the ramifications of that weren't fully purposeful. But again, I would also give her credit for getting Cory on board as well. Again, she does end up building this relationship with Matt across the week to where he ends up leaking information to her, which she ends up leaking it back to Cory, which gets Cory to flip as well. And obviously taking out Izzy is something that benefits America way more than it does Cory in that particular spot. So yeah, overall, I do think America does very good work during that week. Beyond that, though, again, like, I feel like her game is just kind of in flux. It's one where she's obviously working alongside Cory, but Cory does end up losing a lot of control in the game at that point, where her and Cory are kind of just skating by seemingly week by week. And while obviously Cory is the target ahead of her, it's still in this position where America is probably going to be taken out relatively soon afterwards. And even despite that, doesn't even seem to be that respected by the house. It doesn't seem like she is someone that was that likely to win a jury vote, even if she had gotten to the end, unlike Cory. And also, she would just like constantly get him into trouble anyway, where she just constantly leak information that ended up backfiring her almost instantly. Again, continuously telling Blue stuff that would just get back to Matt and Jag, which would turn Matt and Jag against them. And again, there was just never this point in the game where it seemed like America and Cory were actually in that good of a spot after the flip, where, again, they were instantly nominated together during the Jared HOH. And while obviously Cameron ends up going home after that, they obviously have the double where Jared goes home, and following that, almost instantly, Matt and Jag end up turning on America and Cory, with them kind of being on the back foot from that point forward. And obviously after Cory goes home, America, again, does play okay in getting Jag to believe that she's not coming after him, but it really is just ineffective by the end of it anyway, as it didn't really matter to anything, as they were always just going to take out America following that anyway. So really, I find America's game a bit tough to assess, largely because, again, she's on the bottom for a lot of her game, never really in a true power position. And while I do give her credit for probably one of the biggest moves in the entire season, the Izzy flip, that's really most of what I can truly credit her in the game for, at least as an individual. For beyond that, again, like, I think she plays a major factor into why her and Cory lose trust with the likes of Matt and Jag. Really, just in general, Matt and Jag never truly trusted her, to where even at the time the Izzy flip, they openly talked about how much they trusted Cory more than her. And And while she does obviously make it further than someone like Cory that we haven't talked about yet, she also had less jury prospects than him, where again, I think America struggles to win a jury vote at the end. So I do find myself largely conflicted on America's game, but I do think the fact that she at least pulled off the one good move and obviously had a lot of longevity on the season, it's enough to land her here at number 7. Now, number 6, we're moving on to a player that I think is largely inconsistent in the game. While there are moments of this person playing pretty well and they are a pretty active player, I do also feel like there are many points in the game where they just lose control and they're also sinking their own game, and that person is Felicia. And again, Felicia has a bit of a strange game here to where, again, in the first few weeks, she did have a lot of influence in the game alongside Ciries and Izzy. Mind you, she was always on the bottom of that grouping. Sort of likes of Ciries, Izzy, and Jared were always more loyal to each other than they were to her. However, again, early on in the game, she was very much inside that group. She had sway in the game, though realistically, I don't think there were many points where she really got to utilize it that much, to where outside of getting Kirsten on the block, which in itself is, again, debatable on whether or not that was the right move for her at that point. We obviously see her in week 2 and 3 wanting to flip the vote, though neither of those times it actually happens, particularly the Heum blindside, where again, I think her taking out Heum is still a bad move for her game. Heum was someone that was very loyal to her and wanted to take her to the end game. And taking him out of the game over to likes of Cameron or Jag or Matt, who had no real connection to her, again, I do think is pretty bad. And again, she does end up wanting to flip that vote, ends up being one of the biggest proponents for flipping that vote, and ends up failing in doing so. And following that, by the time week 4, again, her game does start to crumble. Now, her game crumbles, a lot of it being based around her making a final 2 with Jared that gets back to Ciries. That obviously a lot of that plays into the Ciries-Jared dynamic. But even beyond that, I mean, she was becoming very loose with information to where she was just causing her own alliance to become annoyed with her. She also tries to flip the red vote back and completely fails at that, to the point where her own alliance wanted to blindside her on the vote and only looped her in at the last second. And through that, by the time of week 6, she becomes one of the biggest targets on the board, where outside of these big overt targets in Jag and Cam, she was the next biggest target on the board, and also the person that would have been the fall guy for her alliance, which we even see that go through in week 6, where she's on the block dead to rights a day before the eviction, no clue that she's even in danger. And while Cam does tell her that she's going home and she does start campaigning, none of that really matters. She ends up being saved based on things completely out of her control. And while beyond that, again, like, she should have been in a somewhat decent spot to make it deep into the game, aligning with Mimi. Also, again, should have had an alliance with Cory in America that would have lasted. It simply doesn't. And she becomes targeted again at the final 10. So once again, she gets saved due to things that she didn't really do. Now, again, I do think she did actively campaign, and her active gameplay at least did something during that week. But again, it's still a situation where a lot of what ends up occurring that week is simply because of decisions that Cory in America and Matt and Jag made independently from her. And really, the rest of her game is one where she just doesn't have much power in the game. And obviously, comps play a factor into that. People that she wasn't working with were winning a lot of the comps. And she does at least build a bond with Jag to where she gets kept around for a bit longer. And even then, I think she gives up too much leverage in ratting out plans that would have actually benefited her, particularly the plan to try to flip Bowie Jane away from Matt and Jag during Cory's eviction week, which it really seems to stem from this paranoia from getting blamed for situations where she just wanted to get in front of those. But again, it led to her essentially sabotaging her own position by doing so, as really for a lot of the end game, they still trusted Ciries more than they trusted Felicia. And I think my biggest thing too is that I do wonder, could Felicia even win a jury vote? Now, again, I think she more than likely beats Bowie. I think against Matt and Jag, I do think it is a tough road. I think it's a tough road against Ciries, but you never know. Again, like, I just feel like jury prospects as well are not particularly great, to where, again, mixing that with the fact that, again, she pretty much loses control of the game, being pretty much on the bottom for most of the game after week 5, and even within that, again, still fails to get her way multiple times. So again, I just feel like Felicia's game is one where I think it's tough for me to really assess it highly, even though I think she is actually an interesting player. From a pure player perspective, I think there is a lot to like there, but I think in terms of the game she played in the season, I don't think it's particularly great, and that's why she's here at number 6. Now, number 5, we're moving on to a player that also played a still mostly bad game. And straight up, I think this person's probably a worse player than Felicia. But in terms of the game they played on this season, I think it is a step above it, and that person is Bowie Jane. And obviously, a lot of the talk about Bowie Jane is how she's terrible. She actively took Matt and Jag to the end, where they'd even take her to the final two. Again, she really just allowed for this steamroll in the end game. And again, I do agree with that. However, I do think there is acumen to her game outside that, particularly in the fact that, again, she avoids being nominated for the entire season, which is a pretty insane stat. And again, a lot of people will bring this up as, oh, Bowie Jane just wasn't a threat. However, many times in the past, these people that aren't threats are used as pawns. They are looked at as expendable. Bowie Jane was in this position where she wasn't looked at as expendable. She was looked at as a true ally, someone that was a valuable member of these people's alliances. Again, Matt and Jag constantly avoided putting Bowie on the block to maintain her trust in them. Cory in America also fully thought Bowie Jane was on board with them. We even see Jared in his first HOH reign. Despite numerous people telling him to put up Bowie Jane, he refuses to do so because he's worried about pissing her off. Like, Bowie Jane, again, I think there is some credibility to give to this aspect of her avoiding the block, particularly in the basis around that. Now, again, outside that, she still plays a bad game. I don't think she can win a jury vote. Now, again, I think she comes probably pretty close against Felicia. Who knows if Cameron somehow got to the end of the game, how that would have played out. But again, I think fundamentally she struggles with winning a jury vote. I don't think she beats either Matt or Jag. And again, she actively played the game to get to the end with Matt and Jag. She also ends up being isolated from her own alliance during the first third of the game, to where she gets ostracized and ends up being attached to the likes of Cameron or Red against her own will. But again, I do think she recovers from that pretty well. Again, the fact that she finds herself right in the middle of the new majority that forms after Izzy flip, I think is pretty impressive there. And her pacifying both sides, where both sides actually thought that they were with her. And again, I do think that part of her game is active. Again, she did talk on the live feeds about how she wanted people would think that they could work with her in the game. And again, I do think there is like some activeness in her passiveness that can be appreciated. But again, it's just the lack of jury prospects, along with the fact that she actively gets Matt and Jag to the end. Again, in a position where she had chances to take them out. Again, she could have taken a shot at Matt and Jag at final 6. She could have convinced Jag to not take Matt to the final 3, which would have been a massive move for her. But instead, she just resigns herself to going to 3 in a situation where she gets shut out at the end, despite the fact that she had no win equity. So again, I think at the end of the day, again, it is mostly bad, but I think, again, against Felicia, I think she was in the majority for more of the game, and along with the fact that, again, I think it is still impressive how she was able to not be nominated the entire season, while I also think she was a bit less sloppy of a player than Felicia. Now, again, that's mostly because Felicia played more actively more often, but still, I think at the end of the day, I think in the comparison between Bowie and Felicia, I slightly lean towards Bowie's game, even though, again, I think Felicia's probably the better player in the grand scheme of things. But again, I do have Bowie here, number 5. Now, number 4, and at number 4, we have someone I really wanted to put lower, and to be honest, I very much debated it. And here we do have Jag, the winner of the season. And like straight up, again, I don't think Jag played a good game on this season, really at all. I really feel like there's very little to truly praise from his game for me. Again, he obviously won. And again, that is something that is very much boosting him on this list, as again, I actually consider putting him below Bowie Jane. Also, if he had played the game that he played but lost the jury vote, I think he would be below Bowie Jane. Like, I think he played terribly and just somehow won despite that. And when I say that, I'm not even taking into consideration the fact that he got voted out and had to come back into the game. At this point, I'm mostly just talking about his decision to take Matt to the end, which I think is still ridiculous. Again, we're in a world where Jag is literally told by almost half of the jury that Matt is going to win if he gets to the end, and he still decides to take Matt to the end. It's idiocy. And again, if Jag had lost this game, this would be one of the dumbest moves in the history of the show. And to be honest, I even think it's still one of the dumbest moves in the history of the show, despite the fact that he wins. Where again, the fact that he takes Matt over Bowie Jane in a situation where he's told he's gonna lose to Matt is astronomically bad. Even going further back than that, I mean, we can look at the fact that he was able to win HOH 2 times in a row. That stopped him from being targeted that week, and also greatly benefited his position for the weeks to come. And really, just again, the entirety of his game, I think, is just entirely bad. I mean, like, obviously he gets evicted in week 4, and everything leading up to that was a game that showed like some promise, particularly in week 1, where he tried to form this majority alliance, but once it gets ratted out, he struggles to recover from that. And even then, the foundation around the alliance was flawed in itself, considering how openly they made it known to the people on the outskirts that they were on the outskirts. Again, week 4's boot week is ridiculous, to where while the vote did flip back and forth at a point, he also had so much ammunition to stay that week, where he very easily could have ratted out Ciries and tell Cameron that he's in a fake alliance and work together with him to take down the Ciries side of things. But instead, he just becomes resolute and getting taken out unanimously, only being saved by Matt's path to power, which, again, people credit Jag for being saved by his social game, but it's also extremely lucky. The fact that Matt even had the opportunity to save him to begin with. Or again, Matt had to be looked at as a fan favorite in the game. Matt had to win the competition and had to be on the specific week where Jag was going home. Again, there's so many lucky circumstances that caused Jag to be saved there. And the dumbest thing is that he then proceeds to do the exact same thing for the next 2 weeks. Where in week 5, he's put on the block again as the target, being volunteered for the block and not fighting against it. And again, he was going home until the day before the eviction, where Red blew up his own game at the last second. But again, Jag was dead to rights there, and like in a way gets saved by the Ciries and Jared connection. Or if it not been for Ciries having to cover Jared's tracks, more than likely Red stays in the game still. And then we get to week 6, where he starts off the week doing the exact same thing he did in week 4, where he once again has all this information to rat out Ciries and just doesn't do it. He literally does the exact same pitch to Cameron that didn't work the first time, and becomes resolute in the fact that he's going on the block against Blue again, only to be saved due to Cameron not being a complete idiot. And he once again, through this week, has to be convinced by Cameron to make the flip against Izzy, something that is very beneficial for his game. But even once that move happens, he's still a massive target in the game, where the likes of Mimi and Felicia are still coming for Jag at that point. And again, him and Matt do pretty good work in maintaining Cory in America. Obviously, the zombie week was another thing that greatly benefited him, bringing back Cameron to the game, a big target ahead of him, but also having Cameron wanting to work with him. Mind you, that was largely due to the connection to Matt, not due to anything Jag actually did. And really from that point forward, he goes on a comp run. He literally is immune the entirety of the jury phase of the game outside of the double eviction, in a situation where Bowie Jane wins HOH and was never going to target Jag. Despite, again, there being many points where people would have taken out Jag. Again, had America, Ciries, or Felicia won any of those endgame HOHs, he is the target there. If any of them won Final 6 HOH, he's out of the game. And the thing is, like, people mention the fact that, oh, Jag was running the game. He made all decisions for him and Matt. The thing is, though, he didn't, though. Or even, like, the biggest move that he gets credit for on the show in the Cameron backdoor, that was a move that Matt told him to do. Matt had to convince him to take out Cameron, to which he didn't want Cameron to go coming into the week, but was told by Matt that they had to do it. Targeting of Blue over the likes of Cory in America is still pretty egregious. We have this really terrible jury management on people's way out of the games, with him simply not owning up to his game and further annoying people there. He really makes no move of his own that is actually beneficial to his game until the final 5. Or even like something like the Mimi vote is something that fell into his hands. While it is the move that benefits him the most, it's a move that he didn't even go through with because he assumed Cory and America weren't on board. There's miraculously be on board without his influence. That is when that move goes through. And again, so many of his moves across this game were simply not moves that he would have been able to do himself. They are moves that he had to get approval from Matt in order to do, because he simply didn't have the social capital to actually execute any of the moves. Again, even the attempted backdoor of Cory during the Cameron HOH, that was a move that Jag himself failed at convincing Cameron to stop the plan. It was only because Jag was able to get Matt back on board that Matt was able to stop that plan from Cameron. So again, Jag's entire game up until the final 6, I think, is a game that is really void of any true good individual move in the game. And then we get to the final 5, where again, at that point, he does take out Ciries. 100% give him credit for that. That is the right move. It obviously separates Matt and Ciries, both the person that Matt was considering taking to the end over Jag, but also someone that would have protected Matt over him in the game. Again, 100% the right call there. And like, it does seem like this potentially was the game-winning move for him. It seems like a move that really changed the perception of the jury house to make it seem like Jag was more of the person in charge than Matt. Even though, again, I think that's a fundamentally wrong interpretation of the game. But we then get to his disastrous Final 4 and Final 3 rounds, where again, despite being told that Matt is going to win the game, if he goes to the end with him, he still takes Matt to the end of the game. Which again is still just so ridiculous, especially when you have such a big goat in Bowie Jane in the game, and he doesn't take Bowie Jane. Instead takes someone he thinks will beat him. It's so stupid. And again, he somehow wins at the end, despite making all these dumb moves. Because of the jury's perception that he dominated the game because he won all these competitions and had to make these decisions more outright, when again, none of these decisions have any substance to them outside of the Ciries move. Like really, almost none of them were actually to his best interest at the point that he made those moves. And the ones that were moves that he had to be convinced by other people to do, where it really feels like he kind of wins this game due to the ego that Cameron has. Where again, I do feel like Cameron was a very influential juror on this season. It does feel like Cameron is someone that really persuaded the jury to think of the game in his way, where listening to Cameron's exit press, you can very much tell how blindly pro-Jag he was in the jury. And again, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Cameron saw his own game in Jags, where despite the fact that Cameron was closer to Matt for the entire season, really that comes down to most people in the house that they were closer to Matt than Jag for the entire season. Cameron seems to be pro-Jag on the jury simply because he was the other person that got evicted and still made it through the game and won a whole bunch of comps. And again, and while you could say, okay, Jag did well in the jury questioning, I don't think any of that mattered. I think the vote was already set in place by that point anyway. And I would rebuke that by saying his speech was terrible, to the point where the jury was audibly laughing at him. Again, like, I just think Jag played a terrible game on the season. I think he's a terrible winner for this season. Again, not saying that he isn't a deserving winner for whatever that even means, as obviously if you win the game, you win the game. But again, I do feel like Jag played as bad of a game as he possibly could have. And if he had not won, I would have him so much lower on this player ranking here, especially with his decision to take Matt to the end, which is still so asinine to me. So again, I think Jag is a pretty bad player, but because he won, and again, also the wonkiness of everyone's games up to this point, I guess he's here at number 4. Not number 3, and again, number 3 here is not even someone that I think is that great of a player either. I think this person's still very flawed in the game that they played, but at number 3, I do have Cory. And Cory is a player that I think was a very influential player early on in the game. He is someone that I think has a lot of things to really prop him up for, but he also has a lot of things to really demerit him for. I think early on, despite the fact that he gets really screwed over by being separated from the rest of the cast for a few hours at the beginning due to just him being sent to another region for no reason, he's still able to recover from that very well. He's still able to save himself from being on the block, despite most of the house wanting him to be on the block, by really making this strong bond with Riley. He then is able to find himself in the middle of the house. He finds himself being attached to the family style side of things while also finding a place within Ciries' power structure. And the Crossroads alliance that forms between him, Izzy, Jared, and Ciries ends up being the actual true alliance for Ciries for a good chunk of the game. And again, all that is very impressive work. Again, him actively playing the middle during those beginning portions of the game were very impressive. Now, his game does start to unravel by the time of like week 4, with him getting into some tiffs with Jared and him probably leaking too much of his endgame plans with Izzy that gets back to Ciries, and also him leaking information to America that gets back to other people that make them upset at him. And again, there was definitely some sloppiness there. But again, he's still eventually able to recover from that. And again, it's essentially a battle between him and Matt in the middle portion of the game to maintain that middle position in the game. And all that obviously culminates in week 6, where in that position, he's able to make a really, really big move there in taking out Izzy, flips the entire power structure against Ciries Fields, and puts himself in the position where he could have potentially run the game from that point forward. Now, obviously he doesn't. But again, I think the move in its execution is very impressive. Again, a lot of it had been work that Cory had been doing for weeks up to that point. Him building these individual relationships with the likes of Matt and Jag and Bowie Jane. And while like his overall pitching of the plan was probably not ideal, as I do think it is more of like America and Jag that get Matt on board, I think it's more of Cameron that gets Jag on board. And obviously America is the one that had to get Cory on board to begin with. I do feel like still there's a lot of impressive stuff across that week. Him utilizing his entire game up to that point to make this massive move in the game that put him at the top of the power structure following it. Where again, at this point, he was the one that had Bowie Jane in his corner. The problem is that he gets very complacent in the game after making this move, which again in itself is again questionable if it was a necessary move to take out Izzy in particular, who was someone that was more willing to work with him down the road than someone like a Felicia, where I think you could argue a world where maybe he shouldn't have actually made the move that week, but organized the troops to make a move the following week. But again, I think that would have been a bit too cute at that point, as who knows if that structure would have stayed intact. But still, he obviously gets a very unlucky HOH result where Jared wins HOH. He gets on a block, but even then survives it because he had Cameron as a shield the entire time. But then we get the zombie week, where that's really where his game starts to crumble. Again, it does very much feel like he gets too complacent in the game at that point, where he kind of slacks off on his relationship with Bowie Jane, to where eventually Matt is able to pull Bowie Jane to the Matt and Jag side of things. We also have America constantly leaking information to Blue that gets back to Matt and Jag, that turns Matt and Jag against them. You also have Blue actively going against them due to them taking out Jared, which is just kind of dumb, but again, that's Blue for you. And he obviously burned Ciries at that point. So again, he was definitely coming out of this week in a pretty bad spot, but still not completely unwinnable one, where, like, despite the fact that Matt and Jag had lost trust in him, he still had Jag in his corner who wanted to keep him around for a lot further in the game. Now again, despite that, he is almost backdoored during Cameron's third HOA train and gets to do things completely out of his control. And then he also proceeds to take out Mimi, which is something that's actively bad for his game. The Cameron backdoor, while it is a move that is in his best interest, it's also a move that he had almost nothing to really do with the actual execution of it, with him at this point essentially becoming a scapegoat in the game. And he's obviously taken out during the Invisible HOH week, which, to be fair, again, he wasn't the initial target. He somehow avoids that, to where, again, it was Blue that was the target until she won veto. And even after that, there was talks about taking out Felicia over Cory, but obviously it does fall onto Cory, as it should at that point, to be honest. And just again, overall, it's a game that is very wonky. Again, I do think his game from zombie week on is pretty bad, with him, again, just getting too complacent in the game, him losing a lot of the social capital they had in the game, and also making some actively bad moves. And again, there was some rockiness during the likes of weeks 4 and 5 for him. But again, I do think a lot of his early game is still very impressive. And considering the amount of adversity that he faced early on in the game, the fact that he was able to recover from that and be in the central position in the game, really becoming one of the top allies for the Ciries, Jared, Izzy side of things, and also being a major influence why Heum ends up going home, and obviously putting together the Izzy vote, which the level of difficulty for that move is pretty high. And again, just him being able to execute that move is very impressive. On the fact that, again, he had a lot of win equity by the end. If he had gotten to the end, I do think he is a very likely winner. Obviously, that path was very difficult, but even then, had he survived the final 8 round and Jack had not been able to play in 2 HOHs in a row, I think there is at least a chance of Cory making it pretty deep into the game. Now, again, he probably still gets taken out by the end game, but he definitely would have been in a much better position. I just think he got a lot of unlucky breaks in that final week. But again, overall, again, I think Cory's game for me is better than Jag's just outright. I just think he did more well than Jag across the season. Also, again, not getting evicted week 4, that's also a thing. Also, like, simply getting outplayed by Jag simply just because Jag won competitions and had Matt to bolster the other aspects of his game. So again, like, I do feel like at the end of the day, I do edge Cory a bit above Jag here to be at number 3, not number 2. And again, the top 2 were pretty obvious here, and this is someone that, again, I think you can maybe argue is a better player in the grand scheme of things. However, I think in terms of the game they play on the season, at number 2, I do have Ciries. And again, Ciries is Ciries. Ciries is obviously the survivor legend that we know of her. One of the best survivor players of all time. Came extremely close to winning 3 times. And even on Big Brother, comes relatively close to winning here. Now, I mean, again, she gets taken out final 5 in a position where she's kind of screwed over by Jag's constant comp wins, where, again, based on exit press, it does very much seem like Matt would have considered taking Ciries to the end over Jag, though through the fact that Jag continuously won the competitions, that made it so it wasn't really a possibility anyway. Though, again, even in that sense, I don't really know how the jury votes would have landed. I definitely think it could have been a bit all over the place, but again, I don't really have a great sense of what Ciries' jury prospects were. But again, like, Ciries' game is really a game of 2 halves. I mean, her first half of her game is extremely impressive. The power structure she was able to form through the first 6 weeks is pretty insane. And again, while week 1, yes, she was benefited by having Jared in the game and giving her the information that she needed to fully form the professors, she's already on that path anyway. It just really expedited that process. Again, she already does a lot of work in the first day of getting the target onto Kirsten. She then proceeds to create the Professor's Alliance, again, putting herself in the majority, while also having numerous other alliances. The Brown Sugar Babes, the Bye Bye Bitches, you have Crossroads, you obviously later have Legend 25, you have 7 Deadly Sins, you have the For Real Alliance. Like, there's just so many alliances that Ciries ends up being a part of during the early portions of her game that kept her safe to a ridiculous degree. To where, again, despite the fact that they had known that she is a survivor legend, they for some reason still don't target her. And to be fair, again, most people in the house didn't know who she was. But considering she should have been this massive outlier coming into the game, and the fact that she was never talked about being targeted, or pretty much the entire early portion of the game, is very, very impressive. And again, she had a lot of control in the game. If she really, really wanted to, she could have exerted her will and saved Riley, though obviously decided at the end that it wasn't really worth it. Now, again, there are qualms to be had with her strategic game on this season, where I think at the end of the day, that is where I come down with Ciries, is that she is just one of the best social players we've ever seen. Her ability to really gain trust with people and make them want to work with her is just insane. The problem is that I think strategically, she can be a bit scatterbrained, and to be fair, I feel like her more wonky strategic game was while she had Izzy there alongside her, which Izzy herself is also a very frantic strategic player, so I think that definitely could have been an influence on her. Along with the fact that, again, this is while she had control, to where when she got out of control of the game, I do think her strategic instincts got a lot better. But anyway, again, her taking off Heum, I think, is a terrible move. Again, I think while yes, Heum could have potentially won out in the way that Jag did, still Heum was more on her side than the likes of Jag or Cameron were at this point. To where, again, the fact that they keep Jag and Cameron in the game over Heum is just kind of dumb. Now, again, also, she did very much want to save Jag for the most of week 4 and ends up backing out of it simply due to Jared's connection to Blue, to where then she goes out of her way to obviously have Matt play the power on Jag, which, again, it's disputed how much influence she really had there. More than likely, Matt would have just used the power anyway, but again, the fact that Ciries doesn't fight against it, in a position where at that point it should have been clear that Jag was a bigger threat to her game than Blue, particularly due to Jag and Matt's connection, I think should have been something to at least be worried of. You didn't have the red vote, where, again, I do think getting rid of red over Jag is bad for her game. Now, I will also say, though, that a lot of that came due to the fact that, again, she was harmed by having Jared in the game, to where this was a position where she was forced to keep Jag in the game, where she was forced to take out red because Jared had lied so much that his lies were about to be exposed if Red had stayed in the game. So she needed to take out Red to defend Jared, despite the fact that she knew herself that it was better for her own game to keep Red. And then we obviously have her game crumbling in week 6, which, again, a lot of that I don't fault Ciries for. I mean, again, I think there are things to blame Ciries for. Again, obviously just the franticness of her early game, and again, her taking out Heum, who was a number for her also isolating Bowie Jane. But I think a lot of that round comes down to Jared and how terribly Jared played, while Ciries was, again, attached to Felicia for 2 days where she couldn't really do anything to stop Jared from doing what he did. Especially considering, again, Felicia was the target. She was attached to the target, so she couldn't have any game talks during that time. Now, beyond that, again, she does have a rough couple weeks. I mean, she is potentially in danger as a backup target for Jared. And again, during Jared's HOH, where he takes out Cameron, they don't really do anything to really bolster their position in the game. Ciries also asked to quit during that week, so that's not great either. Also have her being ratted out by Blue constantly, because this was a point in the game where Blue had been trying to save Jared and did that by throwing Ciries under the bus, to which she was unaware of that. But also, again, that's a situation where she wouldn't be able to know that because Jared just consistently lied to her about Blue knowing their connection, which again is just Jared once again harming her game. But again, I do think her game steadily recovers beyond that, to where again she re-solidifies her bond with Matt, to where Matt does very much consider taking her to the end. He even says in the Extra Press that he would have considered taking Ciries to the end over Jag if he had the opportunity. Ciries is again able to keep herself safe for a lot of the mid game, to where again people just trusted her and wanted to work with her and take her further into the game. Again, even over the likes of Felicia, even though they looked at Ciries as a more dangerous endgame threat. And again, she was poised to still make a big move in the game. Had she been able to win any competition, she would have taken the shot that she needed to take at Jag, which in doing so would have gave her Matt all to herself and put her in a really strong position moving forward. Again, like, I do think she had her strategic game pretty set at that point. Again, the problem is, again, you have Felicia throwing her under the bus, constantly ruining her position there. But even then, Ciries was able to recover from that, though still it did cause some distrust with Jag in particular that bleeds into her eviction week. But again, it's a game where I think the first half of her game is insanely impressive. And for her game to completely crumble at week 6 and still somehow make it to the final 5, with her gaining back a lot of that social capital points throughout the game, again, I do feel like Ciries' game on this season is still very impressive. Again, I think the things that make her not the number 1 pick are, I mean, 1, she got 5th place. didn't make it further in the game. She also is, again, a bit of a question mark win equity wise, along with the fact that, again, there are definitely these big danger spots for her in the game in the middle portion of the game, while also, again, having some wonky strategic decisions at the beginning. But again, I still think, again, the amount of control she got early on in the game is pretty unprecedented, and they're playing pretty well from the bottom as well following that. Again, I do have Ciries here, number 2. Now, number 1, the number 1 player, BB25, was not particularly close by the end of it, and that person is Matt. And I think Matt is going to be one of the toughest runner-ups to talk about from a game perspective, considering Matt is someone that in many ways was in a position to win the game to then only lose due to things kind of outside of his control. Where again, Matt is someone that I think plays extremely well for most of the season. He plays the middle for a lot of the middle portion of the season, and towards the end game, I think him and Jag really take control of the game, with him really getting his way in most instances. And while his final 5 round I think is particularly bad, I think at the end of the day it was pretty unavoidable, as we'll talk about, while he then convinces Jag to still take him to the final 2, despite Jag knowing that he had better jury prospects. And everyone going out of the house outside of Cameron was pro Matt over Jag. And for that to just change out of the blue in a situation where, again, it seemed to change at the round table, where at that point there wasn't that much Matt could do, as, again, the jury questioning, well, again, I think he performed terribly. There isn't much time to really change any minds during that. And we could already see the jury's minds were decided at that point, just based on their body language, to where, again, in a way, I do kind of look at him as someone that essentially won the game, or at least someone that was in a winning position, as I really don't know what he could have changed to lead to the win against Jag, as I feel like he did almost everything right to beat Jag and then just didn't. And again, I think a lot of that comes down to the final 5 and like how that was perceived from the jury, of them looking at it as Jag getting their way over Matt, even though Matt then proceeds to openly get his way over Jag, where Jag then takes Matt to the end despite knowing the jury loving Matt. But either way, again, it does feel like that was a major turning point for the jury, even though I think, again, that was a position where Matt had no other choice. I mean, considering Jag's perpetuity for competition, and again, the fact that Jag literally wins out from that point forward and had and was the one to actually have to make all the decisions moving forward. Again, putting up Jag that week would have led to Jag being pissed off at Matt, to where he more than likely just outright votes out Matt at final 4, in a situation where, again, he almost did so even without him betraying Jag at 5. And again, I do think Matt was aware of that, of him potentially pissing off Jag by going against what Jag wanted, which could have led to Jag not taking him to the end. I think that is something that Matt was aware of. While, again, in any other situation, Ciries goes home anyway, where even if Matt had put up Bowie Jane, Jag was going to use the veto on Bowie Jane anyway, and Ciries would have been forced on the block, where Ciries would have gone home anyway. Like, no matter what, he was kind of forced into that position by that point. And again, I think there's a lot of also people just saying that, oh, he should have just taken out Jag in the game. The thing is, there was never a chance to do so. Jag literally won a competition every single round from the final 9 on, outside of double eviction, where Bowie was HOH in a position where she wasn't going to put up Jag anyway. Where Matt, even if Matt had used the veto in that situation, there's no way he could have gotten Jag up in that short of a time frame. Again, there was no getting rid of Jag. And again, to be fair, he wasn't going to get rid of Jag, but also he didn't need to get rid of Jag for most of the game. Literally up until the jury roundtable, it seemed like the jury was locked in voting for Matt, only for them to change their minds at the last second. And again, even people in the house were aware of the fact that Matt was going to win the game if he got to the end. Again, literally Cory said he was going to win. America said he was going to win. Felicia said he was going to win. Even Bowie had been talking throughout a lot of the end game about how Matt is going to win if he gets to the end. Yet despite that, again, Jag still takes Matt to the end. And I think considering that, it was very impressive that Matt was still able to get Jag to take him to the end. While again, I do think people really discredit the amount of influence that Matt had in the game, where again, a lot of people look at it as Jag running everything. The thing is, Jag would not have been able to do a lot of what he did, and would not have done a lot of what he did if it was not for Matt. Where again, outside the final 5 round, literally every other decision he makes in the game is one that Matt was on board with, that Jag simply would not have been able to do unless Matt was on board with. Again, this stopped Cory backdoor during the Cameron HOH week. That was a move that, yeah, Jag convinced Matt to not go through with, but it was one that, again, whether or not it went through was fully on Matt. Matt had the social capital of Cameron to make that move go through or not. Again, Matt had actually gotten Cameron to go through with that move, as he wanted that move to go through at that point, thinking that it would put a bigger target on Cameron's back for falling around, as he wanted Cameron out, something again Jag didn't want. So again, Matt convinces Jag to take out Cameron to following around, something that Jag didn't even want to do. Also, I think one of the most important aspects of both of their games is having Bowie Jane on board, something that again, it was Matt that got Bowie Jane on board. It was Matt's connection to Bowie Jane that got her to work with them. It was Matt's leaking of information about Cory in America that got her to work with them. Or again, Jag had very little to do with that. And well, again, he does the most with that, to where by the end of the game, again, he makes a deal with Bowie, where again, I think that is definitely an aspect of the game where Matt drops the ball, is not securing a final two with Bowie. But again, having Bowie on board to begin with is something that was very much on Matt's corner. Again, coming out of the game, a lot of the jurors were pro Matt over Jag. And a lot of that stemmed from his even earlier game than that. Where again, despite the fact that his first 2 weeks are a little bit rough, I mean, first week he was again involved in the family style and the handful alliance, he was still not the safest person in the world. But then coming into week 2, again, despite Riley getting taken out that week, he somehow avoids being put on the block against her, despite the fact that almost everyone knows that he's going to use the veto on Riley. And by the time week 4, again, he's fully integrated within the Ciries power structure, to where Ciries even talks about taking Matt to final 3 over Izzy, which is pretty insane. And again, at that point was included in almost all of Ciries' alliances, and was this massive rat for Cameron and Red, to where he would constantly leak their information back to the other side. And while he does technically fail at saving Jag in week 4, and then also essentially fails in week 5 as well, his positioning in the game despite that is still very impressive. And obviously he wins the power that saves Jag, which I know some people are claiming post show that that was now the wrong move in retrospect, which I think is ridiculous. Again, at the end of the day, keeping Jag in the game is very beneficial for his game, especially considering the fact that he was beating Jag in the final 2 for most of the season anyway. But again, I think it's a situation where he didn't need Jag. Jag is someone that, again, yeah, it banners his position for sure. Having another fully loyal ally, someone that's going to take him to the end, someone that's going to win comps to benefit his game, but it's also a person that he didn't need. By that point in the game, he was so well integrated in the game that he was pretty much guaranteed to make it to around the final 5, being pretty unfettered at that point, with just so many people wanting to take him deep into the game, where again, despite the fact that he is a massive guy, he is an Olympian, somehow he's not being targeted. And again, through the Izzy week, and again, through week 6, I think he plays impressively as well. Though, interestingly, I think the Izzy vote was actually something that was probably not in his best interests. So again, he has to be convinced of it, and I think at the end of the day, it is a move that just upset his current standing in the game, where by that point, he was the best position in the game by far, and by making the move, it actually lowers his position in the game. But he's still able to recover from that the following week anyway. Or again, through the next few weeks, he's able to secure his relationship with Cory in America. He obviously has Jag. He's able to pull in Bowie. He maintains Cameron, to where Cameron, again, makes the fugitives with Jag in that. Again, keeping Cameron in as a target ahead of him, but also keeping in Jag as a target ahead of him. And really, just again, throughout the entirety of the game, there's never a point where Matt was going to be targeted over Jag. Jag was always the target ahead of him, despite the fact that, again, for most of the season, Matt had more jury prospects than Jag. And really, I think outside of the jury roundtable, I think Matt beats almost everybody on this season. Again, based on the way the jury was talking about him coming out of the house, like, Matt was just such a massive jury threat until at the end he just wasn't. Now, again, I think you can fault him for sure for how he portrayed himself to the jury. Again, the fact that, again, while he was a very influential player in the game, and again, they did recognize that at points, he didn't maintain that image. And again, I do think the final 5 round in particular is a major aspect of that. I do think he kind of wasted the opportunity through goodbye messages to really prop up his game. Again, there are definitely things to criticize, but again, I think in comparison to the rest of the people on this season, I don't think it's really that close that Matt is number 1 here. Again, being really well positioned throughout the first half of the game, being able to actively play the middle in a really impressive way, while also taking more control over the game in the jury phase of the game. And then, despite being looked at as the biggest threat on the board, is still taken to the final 2, to where again, it just makes this all a bit strange in the fact that he didn't win, which is the one major sticking point for me in terms of the overall assessment of Matt's game from a grander point of view, which again, I'll talk about when I rank every player early next year. But in terms of the BB25 player ranking, it's not particularly close. I think Matt easily played the best game this season, the most consistent game this season. So because of that, for me, he's here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my player ranking for Big Brother 25, the end of my BB25 coverage. Now, as I mentioned at the end of my BB25 review, I mean, obviously, yeah, we have Survivor 45 going on. We have Amazing Race 35. I'll be doing videos on those in a somewhat timely manner, which should be coming out immediately after the season's finished. We also have Reindeer Games, which I will try to do a video on. I don't know exactly when that will come out, though. Truth be told, it might not be until even into 2024, but I will try to do a video on that at some point, along the fact that I will be doing videos on Survivor UK as well, but also that might have to be delayed to 2024 just because of how much is going on to the end of this year. But obviously, again, I will be ranking every player in the history of the show early next year, so you can stay tuned for that as well, along with the fact that I'll obviously be back for BB26, and around that time I'll also be redoing a lot of my bigger Big Brother rankings I did in my first year of the channel, so you can stay tuned for all of those things. But for now, that is it for my coverage of BB25. Thank you for watching.